some in a departure from our normal Thursday night share on the parsha. We're going to share some Divrei Torah and the Haggada. That was popular. It's good. But of course, just a very brief idea on Vayikra, which I think has a special relevance to what we're trying to achieve in the build-up to Pesach. Rabbi Sarna was the shkiach of the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, who was a great, he was an unbelievable personality. He accompanied the Slobodki Yeshiva when it went to Hebron, and he was there during the 1929, the massacre, moved with it to Yerushalayim, and he was known to be especially close and warm and supportive to his Talmidim, an incredible figure. It's brought that there was a note found on the side of his Chumash at the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, and the note said as follows: the Torah begins Parshas Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra, Vayikra El Moshe, and Chazal famously say the Vayikra is a lashon chippah. It's a lashon of closeness. It's a lashon of attachment. That's what it conveys. Says Rabbi Sarna that what creates the chippah, what creates the attachment, is the El Moshe, is the fact that Moshe's name is mentioned. Because when you mention a person's name, that creates a bond. It shows an interest. It shows that you care. It shows that the person is meaningful and the person is important to you. And that's why Vayikra is a lashon chippah. Vayikra is a lashon of attachment, of closeness, because it was Vayikra El Moshe, because Hashem mentioned him by name. And I think the message here is that the closer we feel to something or to an idea, the more we want to involve ourselves in understanding that thing, in understanding the details, understanding the messages. That is chibah. That's what creates closeness. That's what creates a bond. That's what creates attachment. Just as in Bein Adam LaChavero, when we care about someone else, we want to we do Torah to someone, we mention their name. That shows we're close to them. That shows we care about them, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu does to Moshe Rabbeinu. So too, when we approach the Yom Tov of Pesach, it is essential that we do not arrive at it just as we left it last year, but that we have showed that we care and that it's meaningful, and that that what we are trying to achieve this year is different to last year, and that the Haggada and the whole Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story, the essence of what it means to become and be part of Klal Yisrael, is something which we have an attachment to, which we have a chibah towards. And to do that, just as in the parsha, we have to learn it, we have to understand it, we have to go into detail. And that's what we're going to try and achieve. As we said, this will be split into two halves, so we will try, we're not exactly half, we'll try if we can to cover from the beginning of the Haggada, we won't cover everything, to approximately to Tzei Lamad, and then we'll do the second half next week. Just an idea on Shechianu. You say Shechianu in Kiddush. What does Shechianu mean? What is the significance of Shechianu? Why is Shechianu such an important, why does it epitomize the moment when we arrive at a Yom Tov? And it's especially meaningful, of course, on Pesach, when the last time we said Shechianu on Yom Tov is so many months ago. It's Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres. Rav Dessler says that the idea of Shechianu is closely bound up to the concept of time. Time is a sense that every moment is a new opportunity. When we arrive at different moments in time, in terms of the year, in terms of the when we go through the Yomim Tovim, every moment, he says, is a new opportunity to define our spiritual identity, to define what our identity is. And we think, he says, that time passes by us. That's how it is. And it doesn't affect us and it doesn't change us. But the reality is the opposite. The reality is that one way or another, what we go through and what we pass, when we go through the different periods of the year, when we pass through a Yom Tov like Pesach, one way or another, it does change us. One way or another, it does have an effect on us. But the extent to which it will change us depends what we do with it. It depends how we use it. And he brings a mashal, he says, to understand how it is and what a moment in time is. He says that you've got to imagine a map of the whole earth, where every point on the map is a sign of another city, another place. And it's covered with a piece of paper where there is a little hole in that piece of paper. There's only one hole in the sheet of paper, right? That covers the map. And when you pass the map over, when you pass the sheet with the hole in over the whole map, what happens is you can see through that little hole city after city after city, okay? But it appears to us that at the moment, the person looking, that at the moment when they look through and they see that city that the hole is over, that's all they can see. And it's as if there isn't any other cities at all. But the reality is, of course, is that if a person sees what's really going on, they understand that all the cities are there. Every point on the map is there. It's just that most of the map is covered most of the time, and you only see that particular point. We only see the point in time we're at. But the reality is that in the future, we'll be able to see all of the points in time together. And that indeed is exactly how we're created as well. Chazal say that a person before they are born is sofa umabit, misofa olamad sofa. We're able to see the entire world. You're able to see everything from the beginning to the end. That means to say, we can see and understand that everything is one. Although when we enter this world, we only see the fact that we are Zman Hazeh in this particular time. That's because that's the attitude we need. We need to focus, and we have to focus. That's what human beings are. We focus on this moment and maximizing this moment in time. But the reality is that it fits into the whole plan and everything else. And that's something which we have to appreciate, that we are passing through a period of time which can change us and will change us. And the question is, how can we maximize that opportunity? We approach the beginning of the Seder, and we have this the idea which puzzles us year in, year out, and the idea of Kadesh Yishalo Atinokas. Why is it that we get to Orchatz and Karpas, and we have this idea of Karpas? Chazal tell us that it's Hekera Latinokas. That's how it is. The Tibul Rishon, the first dipping, is in order that children should ask questions. And the Rishonim and Acharonim all ask about this. They say, what exactly is the answer then? We should respond, right? In other words, when the question is asked, when they see that we're doing these things to ask questions, right? So they're going to say, why are you doing this? And what are we going to say? So you should ask. It's like a bit of a strange, it's a strange thing. Like there must be a reason as well, right? There are various reasons suggested. One of the reasons given is that the idea of the urokos, of the vegetables before eating, is a zeicha, it's a remembrance of the beginning of slavery. This is developed in various different ideas by different Rishonim and Acharonim. The Rokeach says that we eat urokos specifically because they have the substance, or they are a bit like the straw, the teven, vegetative matter. That's idea. It's the straw and the idea of how they were used to create bricks. It's the beginning of Shibud. That's one reason. That's what the Rokeach says. The Bach says that the idea of dipping before the meal is a sense of cheres, a derech cheres, a pathway towards understanding that we will arrive eventually at freedom, right? Because this is the way people who are royal behave. They have sort of hors d'oeuvres before the meal, which it sort of demonstrates the significance of the meal itself. But the Pri Chodosh says that very simply, he says, there is no tshuva, there is no answer. There is no answer. And that, he says, and therein, or we can understand what he's saying, that therein lies the power of the whole essence of what we're trying to achieve at the beginning of the Seder. We perform this, we perform this act as a prompt to ask about everything else. And there is no reason. That's what he says. There is no real reason, but it's only Kadesh Yishalo Atinokas. So they will become to ask about other things. There's a beautiful story told about Isidore Isaac Rabi. He was a Nobel Prize winner. He discovered nuclear magnetic resonance, which became the precursor to what was necessary to create MRI machines. He was Jewish, he was Hungarian originally, came to the United States as a child. And in 1988, after he passed away, a letter was written to the New York Times describing one powerful aspect of his education, his life. He said that this man, this great scientist, was once asked, why did he become a scientist? Why didn't he become a doctor, a lawyer, or other normal Jewish professions? And he answered and said as follows. He said, because every other Jewish mother in Brooklyn, asked her child, what did you learn? What did you learn? Did you learn anything today? Did you learn anything today? But he said, I used to come home and my mother used to say to me, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? And he said, that made me a scientist because that made me ask questions. And the idea is that if we can prompt our children to ask those questions at the beginning, did you ask a good question today? That opens the door to so many other things. I mentioned on Shabbos this beautiful idea I saw in the name of Pesach Chrome, which is it's just a profound thing. The fact that the Torah Shabbat begins with statements, Bereshis bara Elokim, right? The statements, not my morim, the whole way through. Whereas when you get to Torah Shabbat Peh Mishnayos, it begins with a question. It begins with a question because now we have to be active. And therefore, that's what we do at the beginning of the Seder. We take the essence of what we're trying to achieve, and we do something which, according to the Pri Chodesh, that is the only reason. The only reason is to develop the right attitude for the rest of the Seder. We come to Holach Mo'anya, and there is a question that the Barbanel has a famous Haggada Zevach Pesach. And the Barbanel's Pirush on the Haggada, he deals with a basic question, which is how are we to reconcile how the way we describe the matzah in Holach Mo'anya and Rabban Gamliel, right? It seems to be presenting two different ideas as to what's involved with the matzah. In Holach Mo'anya, we say, this is what our ancestors eat. And then we go on to say, there, we are describing something very differently to what we describe in Rabban Gamliel. The idea of why the reason we eat matzah, people take on the hachmetz, they have time to rise, etc., etc. There's two totally different things going on. Barbanel says that matzah is cool. That here we have the matzah is called lechem oini in the Torah. It's called lechem oini, a poor man's bread, for two reasons. Number one, he says, is because the nature of matzah itself is impoverished. Is something which is very thin. It doesn't, as we know, it doesn't rise at all. It stays in one place. It itself doesn't have any substance to it. It will not rise. It will remain low all the time. And that's why it's lechem oni, because it remains in a lowly state. It's impoverished. It remains impoverished, right? The second reason why it is called lechem oni is because it is difficult to digest. He says the words, this is the Barbanel, kashenes akel but it's stumka. It's difficult to digest in the stomach. That's what he says, right? And it stays a long time in the stomach. And therefore, effectively, what happens is a little bit of matzah can last a person a long time. And that means to say that it's the perfect food for an oni. It's a perfect food for someone who can't afford anything, because they can keep going on matzah for a long time, right? It can sustain a person for a long time. Now, the point here is that he says is that it was because of this the matzah is called holach ma'anya, and it is the reason also. In other words, the first point about it, that's the nature of matzah, and the second reason is the achalo havason of arad Mitzrayim. This is an interesting thing. What does it mean? The achalo havason of arad Mitzrayim. They ate in Egypt. That seems to imply that they ate it in Egypt all the time, not just right at the end when they were leaving. This was the bread they used to eat. This is what they used to eat in Egypt. What's going on? And he says like this. He says that that we are talking here about the fact that they were forced to eat. They were forced to eat matzah by the Mitzrayim. It was a punishment. There are two qualities, two things about matzah. Number one, the matzah at the end. That bread, the bread was not able to rise, therefore they carried on and they had matzah right at the end, and we know all that. That's Rabban Gamliel, right? Here we're focusing on a different aspect of matzah. Here we're focusing on the fact that matzah was given to our ancestors as a punishment. The acholo havason of arad Mitzrayim. It was given to them as a punishment. It was something which is not digestible. It wasn't pleasant. It was very difficult, and it was given to them. That was the food, and that was the punishment they had to suffer.
When my kids complain, I shouldn't get upset.
No, definitely not. Yeah, but the point is that therefore he says that is why what we're doing here is no contradiction at all to what goes on later on in in the Haggada, we mentioned Rabbi Gamliel. He says what we're trying to do here is we are not describing and we are not giving the reason why we have a mitzvah to eat matzah. That's later on. That's later on, right? Why we have a mitzvah to eat matzah. Here we're just describing the essence of matzah. We're just describing what matzah is, the nature of matzah. And why do we do it here? Says the Abarbanel as follows. Chazal instituted that we should invite everyone and ensure they all have a place and they all have something to eat and they all have a proper Seder night. And therefore he says that the idea of mentioning matzah here, he says, is it's like a hachroza. It's like an announcement, as if to say to the aniyim and the evyonim, mevakshim lechem v'ayin, they're seeking bread and they don't have any bread. And we say to them, l'chu lachmu b'lachmi, come and eat with me. Come and eat my bread. Because this bread that I have tonight is lechem oni, or balayla hazeh kulonu shavim. There's no difference. There's no difference between me and you. We are all going to eat the same tonight. V'afal pi says, sha'atem aniyim, and even if you're poor, altis vaishu, don't be embarrassed. Ki kein hoya v'sein b'Mitzrayim, because that was what our ancestors were like in Mitzrayim. So what we're doing here is we are describing the life they lived in Egypt. We are saying that we identify with that existence and the fact that we are essentially all the same. That's what's happening on El Seder. We're continuing and we are telling that story and putting ourselves in their place. But what we do with Holach Ma'anyu is and this is the power of the beginning of the Seder, is we take that mentality, that mindset, and we turn around to those who are most likely to feel different, on the margins, excluded, etc., and we say, don't feel embarrassed to take part, because today we all eat what our ancestors ate. We're not focusing here on the matzah that they had at the end, right? Lohispik b'tzeikom lahachmetz, right? And that created the bond between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that whole idea of the fact that we were so, that we wanted to leave, and that relationship, that's later. Here we're simply focusing on the idea that we all are the same. And that is described through the matzah itself. I mentioned in the past this beautiful idea that I saw by Saxman with Primo Levi describes this in during the war in the camps at the end, and he was left for dead because he wasn't able to go. I think he wasn't able to go, if my memory serves me correctly, he wasn't able to go on the death march because they only took people who could actually walk, and some of them were left physically. And there was about a week or so when those who were hardly alive were left inside the barracks before they were liberated. And he said they realized there was a moment in time when someone managed to find some food that had been left over by the Germans, the Nazis who had run away, and they brought this food into the barracks, and they someone brought the food in and handed a piece of bread to someone else. And he writes very powerfully that was the moment when we became human again. That was the only moment we became human. When we were able to turn around and share what we have with someone else, that makes us human. And before that, we weren't human. A slave is only for themselves. That's the point. That was the existence. And that's what we do at the beginning of the Seder. So we'll move on to Manishtana. The question is, what is the link between Manishtana and Avodim Hayinu? This is discussed by many different Mefarshim in many number of different ways. How does Avodim Hayinu answer, and which question is it answering? Right? Which of the questions of Manishtana? And the Shibbolei Aleket in his Haggada has a slightly unusual approach to this. He says that in fact all we're answering is when we say the words Avodim Hayinu Lefara b'Mitzrayim, we're actually only answering the question of Heseba. That's the question we're focusing on. The other question, the question about leading. The other questions we'll answer later on. And when it comes to principally, he says that the answers to the other questions are found within Rabbi Gamliel, Matzah and Mora, etc. But the answer to the Heseba, the why we lean, is in Avodim Hayinu. The question is why and how and what is going on here. He says that the exits from Avdos Lecheres is, if you like, defined by the concept of leaning. It is a sign for those who are b'nei chorin, who are free. He says, you know why we focus on the last of the questions first? Because this question and the response we give to this question is essential for every other question and everything else about the Seder. Because without it, this is how I'm understanding what he's saying, we don't have the correct mindset for the rest of the Haggada. The difference between the idea of leaning and the other questions focus on specific aspects of the night, of the Leil HaSeder. What is HaSeder? We answer this question first, because if we can't develop the mindset of a Ben Chorin, right? The idea that it is a similar sign of Bnei Chorin, of people who are free, it's impossible to enter. It's impossible to enter properly the Haggada. And that explains two aspects really of Avodim Hayinu. The explanation of the Shirley Leket really fits beautifully with the text, with the words of Avodim Hayinu. Because we say Avodim Hayinu for Hashem at the end, let's just look at it this way around. It's easier to do it this way around, right? We say, what does that mean? Many different explanations. You've all heard many different ideas. Even if we were so wise, we still have to wait in Mitzrayim. According to Shibbolei Aleket, the idea is, it doesn't matter how clever you are. It doesn't matter how wise you are. If you're not able to develop the mindset of what it means to be a Ben Chorin, to have the freedom to choose, to have the freedom to make decisions, to not be an Eved in life, to be a Ben Chorin, and everything that goes with that, which is the mind. Without that mindset, your Chochmah won't get you anywhere, right? That's if the focus is on the leaning aspect, then the simple explanation of the words is very powerful. If you don't have the ability to act and live with freedom and what it means to be a Ben Chorin and the responsibility that involves, Hashem says, you are my servants. What does it mean to be an Eved Hashem? What does it mean to make choices, to have choices in life, to make decisions, to choose in all those dilemmas, to be an Eved Hashem rather than Eved Leparoi, to be a servant? That is something which doesn't depend on Chochmah. Doesn't matter how clever you are. There are plenty of people who are tremendously wise. Right? They've got all the Chochmah in the world, but they're incapable of being free because they're enslaved. So perhaps they're enslaved to that very Chochmah itself, right? They're not. They don't act as Bnei Chorin. And then, of course, just to go back to the first part of Avodim Hayinu, it becomes entirely clear why it is that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu had not taken us out, we would still be enslaved, of course. Because if you can't develop the mindset, that heseva, the concept of being a Ben Chorin, that leaning is meant to engender within you, then you remain enslaved. You remain enslaved to Paro. I went backwards, just to confuse everyone. In other words, I went back to in other words, there's three parts to Avodim Hayinu, to be clear. There's Avodim Hayinu and Farah Mitzrayim, the statement, right? That's the first part of Avodim Hayinu. The second part of Avodim Hayinu is, if Hashem wouldn't taken us out, we'd still be there, right? We'd still be Meshuvad with the Farah. That's the second part. And the third part is, right, even if we're very clever, we still need to talk about it. So according to the Shibbolei Aleket, he doesn't spell this out, but this is how I'm understanding what I think the essence of what he's trying to get across here is his idea explains all three parts. The first part is the statement that we need to took us out, understand what it means to be free. Part two, if you don't understand what it means to be free, right, then you are truly enslaved, right? You are truly enslaved, because if you can't develop the essence of what it means to be a Ben Chorin, what it means to exercise your power of choice, then you're still a slave, right? And finally, you can have people who are tremendously clever and wise and everything else, and they're not capable of being free, right? It's not a chokhmah thing. It's about understanding responsibilities in life. It's about understanding what it means to be a member of Klal Yisrael, etc., etc. That is perhaps how we can understand Avodim Hayinu based on the Shibbolei Aleket. Why is Baruch HaMokom an introduction to the Arba Boniv, 4 sons? There's a question. Baruch HaMokom Baruch Hu. Why specifically is there an emphasis here on describing HaKadosh Baruch Hu with this word Mokom? So there's an idea expressed by powerful idea of Chaim Friedlander. Chaim Friedlander was Mashgiach in Panovich Yeshiva, incredible thinker, and he says that there's a medrash in Bereshis Rabbah that says, why do we call Hashem by the name Mokom, place? Shehu Mokoma Shel Olam, ve'ein Olamo Mokoma. The world is not his place; he is the place of the world. And he brings the Nefesh HaChaim. Chaim Volozhin Nefesh HaChaim says that he says the following words: according to the simple explanation, Ritzonim Loma. It means to say, Chazal want to say here, K'moisha Mokom. Just like a place is able to bear and carry anything that's placed on it. That's the concept of what a place does. You have a place and it holds what's on it, right? So too, in this sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Mokom Ho'amiti. He is the true place, who lifts and bears everything in creation. If his strength was removed, so to speak, for one moment, everything falls apart. There is no kiyum, there's nothing there, there's no existence, there's nothing. Everything falls apart completely. And therefore he says, Chaim Friedlander, based on this idea of Chaim Volozhin, is the reference to Hashem as Mokom, is the idea of sustaining. Hashem is Mekayim es kol habriya, because that's what Mokom does. Place is the thing that holds everything, right? So Hashem literally keeps everything alive, is Mekayim everything. So therefore, he says that when we refer to Baruch HaMokom Baruch Hu, what we're really saying is the phrase that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself to us through his actions. And through that, we can understand, in other words, the same idea, the idea of Kayim, the idea of existence, of Hashem's existence in the world. Through what Hashem does, we understand the truth of his existence, and it is constantly solidified within us. It's miskayim, it's within us, right? Moving from the idea of a space holding something and branching out into the idea of being mekayim anything. Nothing stands, nothing holds, nothing's present without understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu's role. Through seeing the effect that Hashem, through seeing the Yad Hashem, we understand that how he holds up all of creation, and it allows us also, the idea of referring to Hashem as Mokom is the sense of place, is the sense of how we perceive the way Hashem acts in this world. And he brings, that's what we mean in Musaf Kedusha. We say, Masharos of Sholem Zelozeh Ayeh Mokom Kavodo. Where is the place of his kavod? The kavod itself is hidden. The kavod of Hashem. We can't see that. We can't understand what that means. We don't understand. We can't come close to that. But we can ask, as the Malachim ask, Ayeh Mokom Kavodo. Where is the place of his honor? Where can we see the effect, right? The place, the effect of the way Hashem conducts himself in this world. That is something we are able to try and see, how we can reveal the Yad Hashem, how we can see Hashem's hand sustaining the whole of creation. That's what Chaim Friedlander says. That is what Baruch HaMokom is. We say that Baruch HaMokom introduced this part of the Haggada by saying, Baruch is HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the sense of the way he reveals himself to us, so that we should understand that it is through observing his role in creation and his role in our lives, we can appreciate his presence. And I just thought that maybe based on this idea, it fits beautifully why this phrase is a particular introduction to the four sons, the Arba Bonim. Because the reality is that one of the areas in which we often face the greatest questions in life connects the next generation in all areas. How will they react? How will they continue the message that we have received? The questions we face, or people face towards their own children, are deep, they're existential. we're not sure how the next generation will carry forward what we've handed over to them. And therefore we enter the Arba Bonim with those questions. And maybe we therefore introduce with the words Baruch HaMokom, because when we ask the questions why about our children and their chinuch, etc., the ultimate response is Baruch HaMokom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mekayim everything. Hashem lifts the whole world. The whole world is carried by Hashem. And therefore, that is the only thing you need to, and is the only answer really, to all of those questions and dilemmas that we face in the sense of how we relate and react to the challenges we often face in terms of the next generation. Approach it with the sense of Baruch HaMokom, that Hashem is the place. Hashem holds everything. Everything rests within Hashem's hands, is the greatest possible pathway towards understanding the fact that there can be Arba Bon, the fact that there can be our 4 different children who are all acting in different ways and all responding in different ways. It's a chizuk in that sense. Perhaps we can suggest that is why there's an introduction to the Arba Bonim, that sense of appreciating Baruch HaMokom. And of course, it also helps, Reb Chaim Volozhin's explanation helps us understand why it is that we say Hamokim, Hamokim Menachem Eskom Le'aleinu, it's Shiva, Hamokim Menachem Eskom, right? Because that's the comfort we give. Hamokim Menachem Eskom. No one else will uplift you. There's no comfort. You turn to, we know that. What's the comfort? The comfort is just being there. There's nothing anyone can say. The worst thing to say to Shiva is, I know how you feel. No, you don't know how you feel. No, you don't know how you feel. You don't have no idea how they feel, right? That's the fact, right? What can you do? You can stand there and say, Hamokim Menachem Eskom. I can't help you, but Hashem will. Hamokim Menachem Eskom. Hashem holds everyone. Hashem holds everyone and holds you and holds your Toras. And you will see better days because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking after you. That's the greatest comfort you can give. Hamokim, Hashem lifts you up. Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah. So we move on to Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah, and Rav Dessler, beautiful idea from Rav Dessler. He says that what is the concept? What are we trying to get across with this whole section of the Haggada when we refer to Avram Avinu? Again, that reference to Hamokim, Shnema, right? We bring the Psukim, and it really carries through the whole way. Baruch Shem Avtochos El Yisrael, Shekadosh Baruch Hu Yishuv Esakeitz, Nasos K'ma Shem Avram Avinu, right? The whole thing. What is the focus here specifically on Avram Avinu? And particularly, Rav Dessler asks a question which is an obvious question to ask. Why do we mention Terach? Why are we interested in mentioning Terach? Avram Avinu is the entire, the antithesis of what Terach stands for. Why should we begin the Yichus specifically on Seder night with Terach? I want, and previous years I've suggested, just as an aside, a very beautiful idea from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik, and this really links to the idea, and I'll mention it as an aside because again, it's a really beautiful idea which you can apply in different ways at the Seder, and it links really to the idea of the previous idea of chinuch and how we relate to our children. When Rav Soloveitchik says, if you look carefully at what's going on in the Psukim at the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, Noach, and the beginning of Lech Lecha, end of Noach, the beginning of Lech, you see something very, very strange, right? Because Terach leaves Choron, right? Terach leaves Choron to go to, not Terach, Ur-Kasdim, to go to Choron, sorry, yeah, Terach goes to Choron, right? With Avram Avinu and with the rest of his family, Terach, right? They all go together and they arrive at Choron, and there, right? What happens there? Then Terach stays there. Vayomas Terach b'Choron, right? Terach dies there, and of course we know that the order is different because he dies later, but it's mentioned earlier at the end of Parshas Noach, so it doesn't look bad with Avram Avinu because Avram Avinu left earlier because Hashem told him to. So on the map, yeah, it's that way, north and then south. You know that, right? It's not straight. Why don't they go straight? It's much quicker to go from Ur-Kasdim. Yeah, because you die if you go straight, basically. I mean, no, because you can't go through the desert, right? You have to go through the Fertile Crescent, right? And that's why they had to follow that's why they followed the water. They're up, right? They go up to the north to Choron and then down to Eretz Yisrael, Jerusalem. That's how it is, right? That's how it is. But the whole thing, Rav Soloveitchik, is very strange. You know, what Terach is the Ovid Avodah Zarah, and yet he leaves. Why does he leave? What's going on? Why does he leave Ur-Kasdim? And he says, we don't know. No one knows why we don't know why Terach left, right? We don't know why Terach left. But he says it is possible to suggest that there was a spark in Terach. There was something in Terach. There was something about Ur-Kasdim that didn't sit right with him, and he was searching and trying and leaving, and there was something there. that made him move. And perhaps he suggests that roshem, that spark, that impression was left on his son. And there was something in Terach that did actually point in a positive direction. It's a bit of a chiddush, right? But there was something about him that actually, and Avraham Avinu was able to take it fully. And we know, of course, Terach didn't even get close to it, and Avraham Avinu is the one who HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to, Lech Lecha, etc., etc., etc. But the message of this idea is that that sometimes we have to appreciate the fact that people can plant seeds, and parents can plant seeds in their children. You know, I often used to hear people who encounter people, let's say, where the children became Bali children, so children became from, and the parents would often have a refrain. Parents, let's say, weren't from, but their kids become from, and the parents' refrain would often be, "I don't know what I did. I'm not doing me. I didn't do anything. I don't know what happened to them." But I said they always, invariably, they say they were delighted, they're very happy, you know, really, genuinely, because I didn't do anything. And the response to them is not true. It's not true. I used to say to them, it's not true. There's something you did. Whether it was something you did on a Friday night, or you showed them the importance of Yom Kippur, or you showed them a Seder, there was something you did that left an impact. And it didn't develop the same, doesn't develop the same in all children, doesn't develop the same in every way. But to say that a parent, however far away they may be from Yiddishkeit, doesn't have an impact on the child is just wrong. That's not what we believe. There was something there. So that was the idea of, that was Rav Soloveitchik's idea. What does Rav Dessler say? Rav Dessler says that the message is that we bring this in the Haggada. He uses the words, Amitzvus daito shel Avraham Avinu, the strength of Avraham Avinu's character. Avraham Avinu is able to stand, again, it's not like Rav Soloveitchik. Avraham was able to stand up against everything, against his father, against his household, everything, right? Against the entire world. And to fight for the truth, And he says like this, he says, everyone knows, he says, every one of us knows how difficult it is to go against the tide. It is the hardest thing to do. When everyone is going in one direction, to go against it in a different direction is almost impossible. And especially in a situation where he was in, that he was the only one. And therefore he says, the only way that Avraham Avinu could have done this was with an absolute conviction that what he was doing was right. He uses the phrase, or the way it's explained is the phrase kashrus oref l'tzad hatov, the idea of stubborn, stiff-neckedness, right? For the good, for the positive. And the only way to do that is with a decision which is as firm as iron to make sure to go in a particular direction. And he says that is what enabled Avraham Avinu to receive, and that's the continuation of the Haggada here, right? The bris, the covenant. What is the covenant that Avraham Avinu is able to receive? It's a covenant, it's a bris which will never be revoked. He says that's the difference between, that is what it means, that is what a shvuah is. We constantly refer to the fact that Kadosh Baruch Hu swore to our ancestors. What does it mean he gave a shvuah? The answer, that the essence of a shvuah is, right, is it's much more than a promise. A shvuah, an oath, is something which will never be broken. That's the idea of what an oath represents. How does Avraham Avinu merit that? How does Avraham Avinu merit the bris itself? The answer is because he creates through his own actions such a strong sense of permanence, such a conviction that what he's doing is right, that the very reward from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, is the conviction, is the ironclad promise. As we say at the end of Sefer Vayikra, however far away they will go, I will never destroy them. They will always remain. They will always remain my people. Because you gave that commitment. You gave that commitment, that strength to stand up against the tide, and therefore you will be rewarded with a commitment which is as strong. That's for Hishamda, right? Right? It doesn't, the Hishamda is saying it doesn't matter whatever we go through, we will always remain. We will always remain. Because Avraham Avinu's commitment was the same at the beginning. That's what Rav Dessler says. That's what Rav Dessler says. Amidah keneged midah. No, because according to this, it's like the opposite. Terach represents, according to Rav Dessler, meaning Terach represents the negativity, now the desire and everything else. And the fact that it was Terach Avi Avraham, that's why we mentioned Terach, because because how difficult it was for Avraham Avinu to stand up against that. That was the challenge. That was the challenge. And sometimes to be able to have that, to see that requires immense courage. It requires immense depth of character. But the schar that Avraham Avinu receives is that midah keneged midah. The final, just a very final brief idea I'd like to share is just to begin Seder Lamad. The question is why, again, almost a similar question to Tarek. Why is it that we have this emphasis on Lovon? All the Mefarshim ask what's going on. Why Lovon? Why has Lovon got this prominence here? And Rav Shimshon Pinkus in his Haggada Tiferes Shimshon, he says that when it comes to what Lovon represents is the idea of his absolute negativity. If you look at what Lovon does, and that's the idea of Lovon being white, is complete extreme in one way. There's no gray with Lovon. So when Yaakov Avinu runs away, what does he say? He says, "Habonos bonosai, v'habonim bonai, v'hatzoin soni." Everything is mine. Your children, your girls, the boys, the sheep, v'choil asher Torah yalihu. And everything you see is mine. There's nothing here that's yours. There's nothing here that's yours, right? He could have said, you didn't work for me faithfully. You did certain things that it could have been a gray area. I've got a claim against you because of X, Y, Z. But Lovon is a man of extremes. A Lovon is a man of extremes. And therefore, his only response is something that's completely false. Everything you see is mine, which is clearly completely false. It's clearly completely sheker, because Lovon is absolute. That's what he is. He's completely white, not white in a positive sense, right? It's completely, that's how it is. There's no colors in Lovon, right? That's how it is. Lovon by name and Lovon by nature. And he says that's how you can have the beginning of the Ovos, Nemos, the Shvatim. It can all come from a household. It can come from a household of Lovon. How? The reason is because that if you have something which is complete sheker, where there is no MS at all, it can never stand. It will be removed from existence completely. It's got no kiyum at all. If there isn't a grain of truth in it, it will be eradicated completely. That's what he says. And therefore he says that it is specifically from there that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will produce the Geula, right? He brings a Gemara in Sanhedrin. It's an idea in other places as well. What's the pasuk? Until the whole of the world is turned into a heresy, right? And what's the pasuk, says the Gemara? Right? With saras, right? When everything is white, then it's tahar, then it's pure, right? He says, if there is a tumah, an impurity which has an essence, something of kedusha in, then it can stand. There is some way of it standing and staying, and it can't possibly fall away completely. But where the tumah and the negativity has got nothing to hold on to at all, it's kulay hofach lovon. It's all negative entirely. It has no existence at all. From there comes the salvation. You find this in many, many different ways, different ideas. He says, with Bilam, you find the same idea, right? Through Bilam, who's entirely negative, you get a whole parsha of brachas. Same idea, right? The same idea. Through entire negativity comes positivity, and therefore he says the reason why we go back and we say Tseir Lamad from Lovon is because we want to convey this idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings the Geula, brings redemption, brings, in this case, Klal Yisrael itself from an entirely miraculous source. The exact opposite of where you would think it would be from. That's where Hashem finds the Kedusha. That's where the sparks of holiness come from. It's a deep idea, but I think it's got a very important message, as well as the depth and it's clearly an idea based on Kabbalah, etc., etc. But the idea and the message is that the beginnings of our existence of our people are entirely miraculous. They come from a place where we think there's nothing. It's complete Lovon. It's all negative. It's all sheker, and that's where Klal Yisrael are born from. And from there you go into the rest of the Haggada as well. So Mitzvah Hashem, we will continue. Thank you for listening. We'll continue next week where we left off, hopefully, and continue as much as we can get through. Hopefully some useful ideas. Okay.
Sure, thank you.
It's okay. Thanks for joining. What? 10.